The school was never truly dark. Even after midnight, the hallway lights hummed, buzzing faintly like trapped insects. The linoleum gleamed in strips where my mop passed, but the rest of the corridor stretched away in a sickly dim glow. I'd been working here only 2 weeks, and already the silence pressed too heavy. Silence wasn't quiet. It was breathing walls, settling beams, the soft click of radiators cooling. I told myself that. That's when I saw it. At the far end of the corridor, past the trophy case and the locked double doors, a shadow slipped across the floor, quick, small, the size of a child. My chest locked up. I froze, mop in hand, listening. No footsteps, no door, no laugh, just that shadow vanishing into the dark like it had somewhere urgent to be. Hello? My voice cracked in the stillness. The sound died against the lockers. No reply. I gripped the mop harder. Maybe some kid had stayed behind, hiding, daring me to chase him. That had to be it. But when I stepped closer, the air felt colder, thick as if I'd entered another room entirely. Hello? A voice whispered back. Not mine, not a child's. Something else. The mop slipped from my fingers and clattered against the tiles. The sound too loud, too sharp, and in that ringing second, I swore I heard faint giggling from the dark end of the hall. The sound of the mop hitting the floor echoed longer than it should have, as if the school had swallowed the noise and spat it back. I stood there staring down the dim corridor, my hands damp with sweat though the air carried a strange, chilled bite. I told myself it was nothing. Just my imagination, sharpened by fatigue. Night shifts stretch time until your mind begins filling the empty spaces with ghosts. That's what I believed, wanted to believe. Still, I couldn't shake the image. That darting shadow. Too quick, too precise. Children's feet always give them away with sound, sneakers squeaking, breaths cutting air. But this shadow had been silent. A smear of darkness moving like it didn't need the body that cast it. I picked up the mop, my knuckles whitening on the handle, and forced my steps toward the end of the hallway. The trophy case reflected me in fragments, broken glass panels bending my shape into warped versions. My own shadow stretched long across the lockers. For a second, I thought I saw another one running parallel. But when I looked, the floor was bare. Routine, that's what I needed. Room by room, I checked. Doors locked, windows latched, lights humming. Just me and the endless rows of desks. In one classroom, chalk dust lingered in the air, though the board was spotless. In another, a single chair had been dragged from the row and left in the center, facing the door like it had been waiting. I pushed it back without sitting. The legs squealed across the tiles, shrill and too alive. My shift usually started at 10 p.m. I'd walk the halls, mop where needed, empty trash cans, wipe chalkboards, make sure every classroom looked untouched by morning. It was honest work, lonely but quiet. After losing my last job, it felt like a reprieve. And yet, from the very first night, I felt the school watching. The building was old, built in the 1950s, with renovations that never masked its age. The gym reeked faintly of varnish and sweat even when empty. The cafeteria smelled like old grease and sour milk that never washed out. The lockers bore faint carvings, initials and symbols scratched decades ago. Generations of children had left their fingerprints here. Some stains I knew never fade. At midnight, I reached the gymnasium. Its wide, hollow space always unnerved me. The bleachers folded into the walls like giant teeth. I flicked the switch. Only half the lights buzzed to life, casting the polished floor in patchy glow. I dragged the mop bucket inside, the wheels rattling. That's when I heard it, light, fleeting, unmistakable. A giggle, high-pitched, childlike. It fluttered through the space and died, swallowed by rafters. I froze, the handle of the mop slick under my palm. My chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths. "Who's there?" My voice cracked against the emptiness. No answer, just the squeak of my own shoes when I shifted my weight. I scanned the far end of the gym. Nothing but stacked mats and a closed equipment closet. The air felt heavier, colder, pulling at me. Then, faintly from the shadows under the bleachers, "Go home." 2 words, so soft I almost believed I'd thought them myself. My skin prickled. I dropped the mop back into the bucket and back toward the door. My heart raced, not from the voice alone, but from the tone. It hadn't sounded angry. It had sounded tired. I told myself I'd imagined it, that my brain was starved for sound in the emptiness. But deep down, I knew better. I forced myself back to work, clinging to habit. By 2 a.m., I'd circled most of the school. But near the East Wing lockers, something stopped me cold. Taped to one locker door was a drawing, yellowed, edges curled with age. A child's hand had scrawled it in thick crayon, a stick figure holding a mop next to rows of desks. The stick figure's face was smeared black. Above it, in shaky letters, "We see you." My name was scratched beneath it. The locker handle rattled, as if something inside shifted. I stepped back. My throat went dry. "This isn't funny," I whispered, though I wasn't sure who I meant it for. From behind the row of lockers came the sound of running feet. Light. Fast, impossibly quick, vanishing down the corridor. I turned the corner in time to see it. Not a child. Not exactly, just the shadow of one. It ran without a body. Slipping through the far classroom door that I knew, absolutely knew, I had locked, and then the door clicked shut on its own. Cliffhanger. The protagonist's ordinary routine is now invaded. The child's shadow tied to his identity, and the haunting escalating. I didn't tell anyone about the shadow. Who would believe me? A grown man spooked by tricks of the light in an empty building. But as the night stacked up, the silence grew heavier, the hallways darker. Routine no longer steadied me. I found myself checking doors twice, staring into classrooms too long, waiting for something to move. It didn't take long for whispers to begin. The first came in the library. I was emptying wastebaskets when I heard the sound of paper fluttering. The air was still. Yet in the far corner, a stack of old yearbooks trembled, pages riffled as though someone flipped them fast. I approached slowly, heart thudding, and froze. A voice slid through the silence, low, almost conversational. "You were here before." I dropped the wastebasket. It rolled across the carpet, knocking against the shelf. The sound shattered the quiet, and the whisper was gone. But when I bent down to pick it up, I saw the open yearbook. Black and white portraits of children stared back at me. Their faces blurred, smudged, as if someone had rubbed the ink away. All except one photo at the bottom of the page, a boy I almost recognized. He looked like every other child, yet something in the angle of his jaw, the set of his eyes, it stirred something. I shut the book hard and shoved it back. By 3 a.m., I was back in the hallways, restless. That's when I noticed the graffiti on the tile near the east stairwell, faint letters scratched into the wall. "They don't forget." I ran my thumb over it. Old, worn, probably decades old. But the words looked fresh, carved by something sharper than a pocket knife. The school wasn't just old. It was scarred. At dawn, when the other staff came in, I almost asked someone about it. But the words stuck in my throat. I didn't want to be laughed at. That night, I returned with heavier steps, as if dragging chains. The silence welcomed me like an old friend, only now I could hear its pulse. Near midnight, in the cafeteria, I heard a chair scrape across the floor. When I turned, one of the plastic seats had been pulled out from a table. I stood there, waiting. Another chair screeched back, then another. A dozen, dragged by invisible hands, filling the space with shrill echoes, until the room looked as if children had just sat down for lunch. The air turned cold. I whispered, "What do you want?" The answer came from everywhere and nowhere, in overlapping voices, some high, some broken. "See us." The lights flickered. My mop handle rattled against the floor as I clenched it like a weapon. And for the first time, I felt something more than fear, guilt. I didn't know why, but I did. The next evening, I came in early, hoping the daylight would blunt whatever lived inside these walls. The school always felt different in the daytime, alive with voices, the chaos of students spilling from class to class. At night, it became a tomb. I was wheeling the mop bucket past the maintenance office when I saw the door open. The faint glow of a desk lamp spilled out, and inside sat a man I'd only glimpsed before. The old caretaker. He was hunched, white-haired, his shirt stained with oil and dust. His eyes flicked up at me when I paused in the doorway. For a second, I thought he might send me away. Instead, he gestured me in with 2 fingers. "You've been hearing them." His voice was rough like gravel. I froze. "Excuse me?" He leaned back in his chair, the springs groaning. The children. The air felt colder in that little office than in the halls. I stepped in, shutting the door behind me. "What are you talking about?" He let out a humorless laugh. "Don't play dumb. The shadows, the voices. You wouldn't be standing here if you hadn't." I swallowed hard, gripping the mop handle like a lifeline. "Look, I thought I saw something. That's all." The caretaker's eyes narrowed. They like the new ones best. The ones who don't know the story. A silence stretched between us. I didn't want to ask, but the question forced its way out. "What story?" He leaned forward, elbows on the desk. His face was lined, eyes shadowed, but his voice dropped to a near whisper. "Fire, long before your time. A wing of the school went up. Some said faulty wiring. Some said negligence. Truth is, doesn't matter. Kids died. Too many." My stomach tightened. The mop handle creaked under my grip. "They say their shadows never left," he continued. "Run these halls every night, still screaming, still playing, still waiting for someone to notice. That's..." I tried to laugh, but the sound was dry. "That's an urban legend." He didn't laugh. He only stared at me with a tired certainty. "Urban legends don't move chairs. Don't call your name. Don't watch you when you turn your back." I felt the hairs rise on my arms. "How do you know?" The caretaker leaned back again, eyes drifting to the corner of the room, as though watching something invisible. "Because I've heard them too. More nights than I care to count." The silence pressed in. Finally, I found my voice. "Why stay? Why keep working here if you know?" His gaze slid back to me, sharp. "Because leaving doesn't help. You don't walk away from this place clean. Once they notice you, you're theirs. They follow." I opened my mouth, then shut it. The words stuck like ice in my throat. The caretaker lowered his voice, barely audible. "They don't forget. Not what was taken. Not who walked away while they burned." I stared at him, my chest tightening. "What do you mean? Who walked away?" He didn't answer. Just turned back to his desk, shuffled papers that didn't need shuffling. The conversation was over. I stepped out of his office, my legs weak, my pulse hammering in my ears. In the hallway, the silence wrapped around me again. He hadn't needed to say more, because I already knew. I had been here before, and I had left. The caretaker's words gnawed at me long after I left his office. "They follow." The phrase clung to me like cobwebs. I couldn't scrub it off. That night, the building seemed to breathe differently. Every corridor carried weight. Every fluorescent hum had a rhythm, as if keeping time with footsteps I couldn't hear. I told myself I'd work faster, get through the shift, avoid the dark corners. But the shadows didn't need corners anymore. In the science wing, I caught sight of them darting just ahead of me, small shapes streaking across door frames, slipping behind desks. At first I thought it was a trick of the light. Then one paused. Just for a second, a boy's silhouette no taller than my hip standing in the doorway, arms slack at his sides, head tilted slightly watching. When I blinked, he was gone. The mop bucket rattled behind me as I backed away. My throat tightened. "Leave me alone," I whispered. The silence drank my words, then returned them in a child's voice, soft and mocking. "Leave us alone." My skin crawled. I spun and hurried down the hall, but everywhere I went I felt them moving. Shadows sliding along lockers, figures darting in my peripheral vision. Sometimes two, sometimes more. In the stairwell, the overhead light flickered. I froze halfway up, heart hammering. The steps above me groaned as though someone small had just run up them. "Quick, playful, stop it," I said, voice trembling. "Stop!" A giggle rang out, bright and broken. Then another overlapping. Dozens. The stairwell filled with the sound of children laughing. Laughing like recess, like a game. But beneath it, I heard another sound. Coughing. Weak, ragged, choked by smoke. I clutched the railing, bile rising in my throat. Memories teased at the edge of my mind. Blurred images of flame, the sting of ash. I staggered into the second-floor hallway, sweat slick on my palms despite the cold air. The lockers lined up in neat, endless rows, but one stood ajar. I knew I had locked it earlier. I hesitated, then pulled it open. Inside, the metal smelled of rust and old paper. Hanging there was a child's backpack, faded red with a broken zipper. A melted patch clung to its side, blackened by fire. Inside the bag was a folded piece of paper. I uncrumpled it with trembling hands. Another drawing. This one showed a classroom in thick black crayon, flames rising along the windows. Little stick figures scratched in the corners, arms raised, mouths open. Above them, another figure, taller, stood by the door. No flames touched him. Beneath, in jagged letters, "You left us." The paper slipped from my hands. A wave of cold swept through the hall, rattling the locker doors one after another in a metallic chorus. Bang! 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 I stumbled back. My voice cracked as I shouted, I don't remember." The lights sputtered and dimmed. Shadows spilled across the floor like water, stretching long fingers toward me. They moved with intent, with hunger. From somewhere deep in the dark, a whisper rose. A dozen voices layered, a hiss and a plea. Remember. The paper at my feet curled, edges darkening, smoke rising from the crayon lines, the air filled with the smell of burning. And suddenly, the hallway wasn't empty anymore. The children were running. Shadows, dozens of them, darting past me, brushing against my arms and legs with a chill that seeped into my bones. I turned in circles, trapped in a storm of silhouettes. Their laughter twisted into screams, their screams into coughing, and then silence. Every shadow froze, every head turned toward me, and one voice, clearer than the rest, whispered in my ear, "You watched us burn." I didn't sleep that morning. When the sun came up, I went home, shut the blinds, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling. My ears still rang with their voices. "You watched us burn." The caretaker's warning circled in my mind. The shadows weren't random. They knew me. Somehow, impossibly, they knew me. By the next night, exhaustion gnawed at my body, but I returned to the school. Habit, obligation, or something darker pulling me back? I couldn't tell. The halls felt heavier than ever, like walking underwater. The buzz of the lights wavered, rising and falling like breaths. My footsteps echoed too loud, as if the school wanted to remind me I was the only living soul left. In the library, the yearbooks were waiting. I hadn't touched them since that night, but now the same volume lay open on the table. My name was penciled into the margin of one page, faint but there. Beneath it, circled in shaky ink, was the boy I had half recognized before. I leaned closer. The face was clearer now. Not smudged, not blurred. His eyes stared at me sharp, accusing. My chest tightened. The boy looked like me. Not exactly, but close enough that my skin crawled. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. The overhead lights flickered. Then a voice, low and sing-song, drifted from the empty stacks. "You were one of us." My stomach lurched. "That's not possible." The voice grew sharper. "You left." I stumbled back, my hand knocking into the open yearbook. Pages fluttered on their own, stopping at another photo spread. Classrooms, children smiling in rows. And there, in the far back corner of one picture, was a boy standing apart from the others. Blurred, half shadow, as if he hadn't belonged. I pressed a shaking finger to the page. My voice cracked. "That's me." The air went colder. My breath fogged. Shadows stretched along the carpet, creeping up the legs of the table, pooling around me. Whispers hissed from every direction. "You were here. You remember. You ran." Images burst in my mind. Flame-licking walls, children coughing, a door blocked by smoke. I saw myself, younger, smaller, standing at that door, watching, frozen, then running. My knees buckled and I grabbed the edge of the table. No, I couldn't." A sharp slam cut me off. The yearbook snapped shut, pages crushing together like jaws. The sound echoed through the library. From the corner of my vision, movement. I turned. In the aisle between shelves stood the silhouette of a child, darker than shadow. It raised a hand and pointed at me, slowly, accusing. I couldn't breathe. My voice cracked. "What do you want from me?" The answer hissed in unison from a dozen unseen throats, the library trembling with the force of it. "Stay!" The bookshelves rattled. Dust fell in soft clouds. One by one, volumes slid from their places and dropped to the floor with dull, heavy thuds, surrounding me in a circle. Each cover was scorched, each page curled with blackened edges. I fell to my knees, clutching my head as the whispers swelled. Screams, laughter, coughing. A chorus of fire. Through it all, one voice rose above the others, calm, almost gentle. "You left us to burn. Now you remember." The shadows surged forward, blotting out the dim light, swallowing every corner of the room until I was drowning in their black tide. And I knew the truth. Bitter as ash, I hadn't just been a bystander, I had survived, and they had not. The next shift, I shouldn't have come. Every bone in my body screamed to stay home, to call in sick, to vanish. But something in me knew it was too late. Whether I entered the school or not, they would be waiting, and they were. From the first step inside, the air carried a wrongness. The hallway smelled faintly of smoke, though no fire burned. My shoes echoed too loud, as if the building had hollowed itself to amplify every sound. I wheeled the mop bucket down the corridor, but the wheels resisted, dragging like they rolled through mud. Halfway to the gym, they locked still. I bent to check, but the bucket was fine. The floor wasn't. Beneath the bucket, a black smear spread outward, a pool of shadow thick as tar. It licked up the sides of the bucket, swallowing the reflection of the fluorescent lights above. I staggered back. The locker doors along the hall slammed one by one. A chain of metallic thunder. Bang, bang, bang. The sound ricocheted toward me until the last locker at my shoulder snapped shut. The hallway plunged into silence. Then the exit doors groaned and sealed with a hollow thud. I sprinted to them, yanking the handle until my arm ached. Locked. Another door slammed down the hall. Then another. The school was closing itself, trapping me inside. No, I muttered, shaking the handle harder. No, no, no! A child's giggle cut through my panic. High, fleeting, too close. I spun, back pressed against the door. The hallway was full of shadows, dozens of them, stretching across the tiles, darting between lockers, overlapping like a tide of black limbs. None of them had bodies, just silhouettes of children, running, skipping, stopping to look at me with heads cocked at inhuman angles. One whispered, soft and clear, "Stay." The overhead lights flickered, buzzing violently. In those fractured flashes, I saw more. Faces in the windows, pressed against the glass, pale and hollow-eyed, staring in from the dark outside. Faces that shouldn't be there. The shadows surged forward, their shapes sharp against the flickering glow. I stumbled back down the hallway, lungs burning, the mop handle clutched like a spear. My footsteps clattered against the tiles, echoing in a rhythm not my own. When I turned a corner, I slammed into a wall that hadn't been there before. The hallway ended in a solid slab of scorched brick. I spun again. The shadows were closer. Their laughter rose, layered with coughing, with screams. I bolted down the opposite hall, doors slamming shut behind me one after another, funneling me deeper inside. The school was locking me in, guiding me to where they wanted me, and for the first time, I knew exactly where that was. The East Wing, the place that had burned, the East Wing. Every instinct told me to stop, but my legs carried me forward as if the shadows themselves tugged the strings. The walls narrowed the deeper I went, lockers pressing close, overhead bulbs sputtering with frantic energy, and then I smelled it, not the faint, stale memory of smoke I'd caught before. This was sharp, thick, choking. The unmistakable stench of fire. No, I whispered, but the word dissolved in the heat. The fluorescent bulbs overhead popped one by one, glass raining down. The hallway plunged into darkness, and then the walls themselves began to glow, faint orange at first, then brighter, like paper catching a spark. Flame burst along the edges of the lockers. The linoleum blistered under my shoes, and the ceiling panels sagged, dripping black smoke. I coughed, stumbled back, my throat seared raw. The air was wrong, hot, but not with the sting of reality. It clung like memory, the kind you can't wash off. Screams filled the hallway. Not mine. Children's. The walls warped and dissolved, and suddenly I wasn't in the school I knew. I was in that night, the one I'd buried. The fire was alive, roaring down the corridor with greedy speed, devouring lockers, windows, everything in sight. Shadows of children darted in the flames, their cries cutting through the thunder of collapsing beams. I knew these screams. I'd heard them once before. My legs shook. I pressed myself against the wall, tears stinging. My mind screamed to move, but my body wouldn't. I was 6 again. The boy who had run. The boy who had left them. No, I gasped, dragging air into burning lungs. I didn't, but the fire didn't care. From the smoke, a small figure emerged. A girl. Her silhouette wavered in the heat, but her eyes were clear, bright, furious. "You left us," she said. Her voice was every child's voice layered together. "I couldn't." "You ran." The fire roared louder, like it agreed. The hallway split into jagged lines of flame, cutting off every exit. I stumbled backward, but no matter which way I turned, the path collapsed in fire and screaming. The girl's shadow grew taller. her body stretching into impossible proportions, arms lengthening like burning ropes. Her hands reached for me, fingers dripping ash. I lifted the mop handle, shaking, holding it like it might save me. The girl only laughed. A wet, broken laugh, then the hallway itself exploded, fire surging forward, swallowing everything. I ran, but every step dragged me deeper into the memory. Doors lined the hall, and behind each one I saw them. Children clawing at windows, coughing, pounding, faces warped in terror. Some slammed their hands against the glass until their skin peeled away in charred fragments. "Help us!" The voices weren't echoes anymore. They were here, now, and they were pulling me with them. The heat bent the air, twisting the corridor into a funhouse tunnel of fire and black smoke. I stumbled, choking, vision stinging red. Every time I thought I found an exit, it dissolved into flames, and through it all, the children's shadows danced, skipping through fire that didn't touch them, circling me, closing in. The girl appeared again, right in front of me, her face half burned, her mouth stretching wider than her jaw should allow. "You survived," she whispered. "Why you?" "Why not us?" My knees buckled. My chest collapsed. I tried to speak, but my voice was ash. The girl leaned closer, and her breath was smoke. "You belong here." Then she shoved me, hard. The floor vanished. I fell through the fire, down, into choking dark. I hit the ground hard. Not the tiled floor of the school, but something softer, thicker, ash. It billowed around me in slow clouds, clinging to my clothes, my skin, filling my mouth like dust from a grave. When I pushed myself up, I wasn't in the hallway anymore. I was nowhere. The world around me stretched into a gray wasteland, broken desks and charred doors jutting from the ash like bones from sand. The ceiling above was smoke, endless, shifting with faint screams that never stopped, and in the haze, they stood. Children, dozens of them, maybe more. Black silhouettes at first, then shapes, burned and twisted, their skin cracked like brittle masks. Their eyes were the worst, empty, glowing, faint white, staring at me like they'd been waiting forever. My throat worked, but no sound came out. One of the shadows stepped forward, the girl from the fire. Her burnt dress clung to her like wet paper. She tilted her head, eyes bright with fury and grief. "You ran." Her words carried across the ash like iron scraping glass. I shook my head. I was just a boy." The circle tightened. Small voices joined hers, whispers blending into a chant. "You ran. You left us. You lived." I couldn't. My voice cracked. I couldn't save anyone. I tried. The girl's mouth split into a jagged smile. "You didn't try. You hid. You watched." Images ripped through me. Smoke filling classrooms. Tiny fists hammering against windows. My own feet pounding down a stairwell while screams tore at my back. I had locked eyes with a boy at the door, my friend, and then turned away. I remembered that now. I had buried it, but they hadn't. I was scared, I whispered. My chest collapsed inward, trembling. I was 6. I didn't know. "You knew enough to run," the girl spat. Her skin blistered, peeled away, reforming with every word. "You knew enough to leave us." The children's voices grew louder, layering into a terrible harmony. "You lived. You lived. You lived." I dropped to my knees, hands in the ash. My lungs burned as though the fire was alive in me again. "What do you want from me?" I cried, finally breaking. The circle stopped. The air stilled. The girl crouched, her charred face inches from mine. Her eyes flickered with smoke. Balance. The ash beneath me shifted, pulling at my knees. I tried to stand, but it clung like quicksand. Cold hands pressed against my back, my shoulders, my arms. Small, impossible hands. They were touching me now, dragging me down. "No," I screamed, thrashing, but their grip was iron. "Please, I've lived with this. I've remembered. I'm sorry." The chant broke into laughter. Bitter, mocking, hollow laughter. "Sorry?" The girl's voice cut through the noise. "Sorry doesn't bring us back. Sorry doesn't burn away." The ground cracked. Beneath the ash yawned a pit of flame, churning and hungry. The heat rose in waves, blistering my skin, filling my nostrils with the stench of burning hair and flesh. The children began to sink one by one into the fire, not screaming, smiling. They pulled me with them, fingers clutching tighter, dragging me toward the pit. I clawed at the ground. Ash tore beneath my nails. I couldn't breathe, couldn't fight. The pit opened wider. The girl leaned close one last time, her voice a whisper colder than the flames. "You don't belong with the living." The hands yanked hard, and I felt myself slide into the heat. My scream tore the silence apart, but it was swallowed instantly, lost in the roar of fire and children's laughter. And as the flames rose to meet me, the truth hit with final, merciless clarity. I hadn't escaped that night. I'd only delayed the fire. The fire swallowed me. Or maybe I only thought it did. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor of the East Wing hallway, cheek pressed against cold linoleum. The lights above flickered, buzzing weakly. The fire was gone. No smoke, no children. Just the silent, empty school. For a long time, I didn't move. My body trembled, slick with sweat. My throat ached like I'd inhaled smoke, and the smell of char still clung to my clothes. My heart thundered so hard I half expected it to break open. But the hallway was normal, too normal. I sat up slowly, pressing a hand to the floor to ground myself. My mop still lay where I'd dropped it hours or seconds ago. The streaks of water I'd left behind had dried into faint smears. Everything suggested time had passed, though I couldn't tell how much. The silence was heavier than before, not the restless kind that comes with old buildings. This silence had weight, like the school itself was holding its breath. I forced myself to my feet, legs trembling. My reflection in the glass of the trophy case startled me. I looked hollow, drained, like I'd aged years in a single night. "Just leave," I whispered. My voice barely carried. It felt wrong here, like words weren't meant to live in this air. Still, I forced myself down the corridor toward the exit. My shoes squeaked softly, and each sound echoed far longer than it should. I kept expecting to see them again. The shadows, the girl, the fire. Every corner felt alive, every closed classroom door hiding someone watching. But I made it to the lobby without incident. The front doors loomed ahead, glass reflecting the faint yellow glow of the outside streetlights. Salvation. I reached for the handle and froze. There, in the glass, my reflection wasn't alone. Children stood behind me, rows of them filling the lobby, their burned skin pale gray in the reflection, their eyes white voids. Silent. Perfectly still. I spun. Nothing. The lobby was empty. My knees weakened and I pressed my forehead to the cool glass of the door. Just go. Don't look back. Just go. I shoved the door open and stumbled into the night. The air outside was damp and cool. The parking lot stretched wide under broken lamps, empty except for my beat-up car. For the first time all night, I let out a shaky laugh, almost hysterical. The cool air was real. The gravel under my feet was real. I was out, but something in me knew better. Even as I drove home, headlights cutting through empty streets, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror. Every so often I thought I saw something shift in the back seat, a shadow leaning forward, a small hand brushing the seatbelt. By the time I reached my apartment, I was too tired to think straight. I stumbled inside, dropped my keys, and collapsed onto the couch. I told myself I would never go back. But sleep wouldn't come. The dreams started immediately. Every night I saw the fire again. Children's voices echoing, the girl's face appearing through smoke. Always the same accusation. You ran. You lived. You belong to us. I woke drenched in sweat, lungs aching like I'd breathed in smoke again. Sometimes, when I staggered to the bathroom, I swore I saw black ash clinging to my hands. And during the day, it didn't stop. At work, I'd catch a shadow slipping into an empty classroom. In the break room, I'd hear faint giggling down the hall, even when I was alone. The other janitors teased me at first. You look like you've seen a ghost, man. But eventually they stopped. Maybe they saw the way I looked at shadows. Maybe they noticed things too, but never spoke. I tried quitting. I walked into the office, handed over my badge. They looked confused. "We don't have you on record," the secretary said. My stomach dropped. "What? You don't work here?" She smiled politely, but her eyes slid past me like I wasn't really there. I left without arguing. That night my phone rang. An old, crackling line. When I answered, children's voices whispered in unison. "You can't leave." I threw the phone across the room. It still rang until the battery died. Weeks passed, or maybe months. Time slipped strangely. I stopped sleeping. When I did, I saw them. When I didn't, I heard them. The shadows followed me everywhere. Mirrors, windows, the corner of my eye. At first they only watched. Then they began to whisper. They whispered in the shower, through the hiss of water. They whispered while I cooked, drowning out the sizzle of the pan. They whispered as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling until morning. Always the same words. You lived, you lived, you lived, until I began to wonder if I really had. One night, I returned to the school without meaning to. I woke up in my car, parked out front. My keys were still in the ignition. I don't remember driving. The school loomed, dark against the night sky, windows blank. My hand moved on its own, opening the car door, carrying me up the steps. The front doors opened easily, without even the creak of hinges. The silence welcomed me back. The mop was waiting where I had left it. And I realized, with a hollow certainty that shook me more than any fire or scream ever had, I had never really left. Now I clean every night. I mop the same halls over and over, the water rippling though I never push hard enough to cause waves. I hear them sometimes. Giggles in the dark, footsteps skipping past. Sometimes I see them in the reflection of the trophy case, the girl, watching me with her cracked smile, and sometimes, when the lights flicker, the ash returns. The walls blacken, the fire hums, and I smell the smoke again. I think they're waiting, not to kill me, not to hurt me, but to keep me, to make sure I never leave them again. And maybe they're right. Maybe I don't belong anywhere else, because the truth is, I did run, I did survive, and I've carried that weight all my life. The shadows are only here to remind me, every night, forever. It's morning now. The halls are empty, glowing faintly in the sunlight seeping through the blinds. Soon the children of the living will arrive, backpacks swinging, shoes squeaking on the linoleum I've polished spotless. They won't see me. No one ever does. But maybe, if they glance just right at the trophy case, when the light bends and the silence deepens, they'll catch something. A shadow. Small. Running. Not theirs. Mine.